At 3:47 a.m. on May 12, 1945, 4 days after the official end of the war in Europe, the Kriegsmarine submarine U-234 emerged in the dark waters of the North Atlantic, 520 kilometers off the Canadian coast. Commander Johann Heinrich Feller held a telegram in his hands that he had just received from Flensburg. The message was clear: sink the submarine immediately. Destroy all cargo. Do not allow capture. Feller was 35 years old, a veteran of 12 combat patrols, decorated with the Knight's Cross. But he had never received an order like that. Germany had surrendered. The war was officially over. And yet, the German Naval High Command wanted him to sink his own ship in the middle of the ocean. The question wasn't why. Feller knew exactly why. The problem was that 6 other attempts had already been made to prevent that submarine from completing its mission, and all had failed. The U-234 was no ordinary submarine. It was a Type XB, built specifically for long-distance transport missions. 89 meters long, with a displacement of 2,710 tons when submerged. It had the capacity to remain at sea for 18 weeks without refueling and a range of 28,000 kilometers. Of the 1,162 U-boats built by Germany during World War II, only 8 were Type XB. And of those 8, the U-234 was the only one equipped for a mission to Japan. The crew consisted of 48 men, but there were also 12 passengers, German officers, technicians, and engineers. 2 of them were Japanese, Lieutenant Commander Hideo Tominaga and General Ulrich Kessler, a Luftwaffe aviation specialist. And then there was the cargo: 240 tons of advanced military equipment, technical documents, blueprints, and materials that Germany was sending to Japan as part of the technological cooperation agreement between the Axis powers. But what made the U-234 truly dangerous were not the torpedoes it no longer carried or the anti-aircraft artillery it rarely used. It was what was stored in lead cylinders within the cargo compartments: 560 kilograms of uranium oxide. U-235. Fissile material. The raw material for building an atomic bomb. The journey of the U-234 had begun 3 months earlier, on March 25, 1945, when the submarine left Kiel bound for Japan. The mission was to cross the Atlantic, round South Africa, cross the Indian Ocean, and reach a Japanese port still under Axis control. Estimated travel time: 14 weeks. But even before leaving German waters, the first attempt to stop the mission had already occurred. On March 16, 9 days before the scheduled departure, British bombers attacked the Kiel shipyards where the U-234 was anchored. The bombs destroyed 2 neighboring U-boats and damaged the main pier. The U-234 survived without significant damage. Technicians worked 72 hours straight to complete final preparations, and the submarine left Kiel as planned, sailing submerged through the Skagerrak to avoid Allied air patrols. The second attempt came 3 days later. On March 28, while the U-234 was sailing along the Norwegian coast, British Beaufighter jets detected the submarine on the surface during a brief battery recharge. The planes attacked with 20mm cannons and rockets. The U-234 made an emergency dive. 2 crew members were wounded by shrapnel, but the submarine suffered no critical structural damage. Feller ordered continuous submerged navigation for the next 48 hours. On April 3, the U-234 crossed the Norwegian Sea and began its descent through the North Atlantic. The planned route avoided the main Allied patrol areas, but the Atlantic in April 1945 was dangerous territory for any U-boat. The Kriegsmarine had lost 783 submarines since the start of the war. Allied U-boat hunting tactics had become devastatingly effective. Hunter-killer groups composed of destroyers and corvettes equipped with advanced sonar, supported by escort carriers with patrol planes. Feller sailed submerged during the day and surfaced briefly at night to recharge batteries and ventilate the submarine. Life on board was claustrophobic. 60 men in a space designed for 48. Thin air when submerged for long periods. Constant humidity. temperatures swinging between 5 and 35 degrees Celsius depending on the depth and compartment. The men slept in cramped bunks, ate canned rations, and dealt with the psychological stress of knowing they were transporting material that could change the course of the war, if there was even still a war to change. The third attempt to stop the U-234 came on April 15. The submarine was 800 kilometers west of Ireland when the sonar operator detected approaching propellers. An active search pattern. An anti-submarine hunting group. Feller ordered total silence and a descent to 180 meters. The U-234 had the capacity to dive to 230 meters, deeper than most U-boats, but this was still within the range of British depth charges. The charges began to fall at 2:23 p.m. Feller counted 17 explosions over 40 minutes. None were precise enough to cause critical damage, but several were close enough to shake the submarine violently. Valves leaked. Instruments broke. One crew member fractured his wrist when thrown against a bulkhead. But the hull held. After 2 hours of absolute silence at 190 meters deep, the sound of the propellers vanished. The U-234 remained submerged for another 6 hours before cautiously surfacing to assess the damage. On April 20th, the U-234 crossed the Tropic of Cancer. The internal temperature of the submarine rose to nearly unbearable levels. The men worked reduced shifts, rested whenever possible, and consumed large amounts of water to avoid dehydration. Feller maintained rigorous control over the consumption of resources. Water, fuel, food, everything had to last until Japan. There would be no opportunity for resupply. On April 30th, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in Berlin. The news reached the U-234 via radio broadcast from the Naval High Command in Flensburg. Admiral Karl Donitz took over as head of state of what remained of Germany. Feller gathered the crew and informed them of the Führer's death. The reaction was mixed. Some men cried. Others remained silent. Some simply returned to their posts. The war was clearly ending, but the mission continued. The fourth attempt to stop the U-234 occurred on May 4th. The submarine was 1,200 kilometers east of the Brazilian coast when American patrol planes detected a radar anomaly during a routine sweep. 2 consolidated PBY Catalinas were dispatched to investigate. The U-234 was on the surface, recharging batteries under the cloudy skies of the South Atlantic. The lookout spotted the planes 12 kilometers away. Feller had 2 minutes to decide. Dive and risk being detected by the Catalina's submerged search radar, or stay on the surface and use the U-234's anti-aircraft weapons. He chose to fight. The submarine was equipped with 2 37mm cannons and 2 20mm machine guns. The artillery crew rushed to their battle stations. The Catalinas approached in a staggered formation, preparing to drop depth charges. The first Catalina attacked from the port side. The U-234's artillery opened fire at 3,000 meters. Tracers cut through the sky. The Catalina dropped 2 depth charges, but they were far from the target. It gained altitude and circled for another attack. The second Catalina came from the stern. Closer this time. Feller ordered an evasive maneuver while the artillery continued firing. One of the 20mm machine guns hit the Catalina's right wing. The plane turned sharply and aborted the attack. The first Catalina tried again. This time, it managed to get close enough to drop depth charges just 80 meters from the U-234. The explosions in the water created massive columns of foam. Feller felt the submarine sway with the shock wave, but no critical damage was recorded. The Catalinas had exhausted their charges. They circled for another 20 minutes, likely transmitting the U-234's position, and then returned to base. Feller dived immediately and changed course to the southwest. On May 7, 1945, Germany signed the unconditional surrender in Reims, France. The war in Europe was officially over. The U-234 received the news via radio broadcast the same day. Feller gathered the crew again. The situation was now different. The original mission had been planned under the assumption that Germany would still be fighting when the U-234 reached Japan. Now, Germany had surrendered, but Japan remained at war. The telegram from the Naval High Command in Flensburg was clear. All U-boats should surrender to the nearest Allied forces. Hoist a black flag. Deactivate weaponry. Await instructions. But for the U-234, there was an additional order. Destroy all cargo before surrender. Especially the lead cylinders. Especially the uranium oxide. Feller had a decision to make. Follow orders and surrender, or continue to Japan. Among the 12 passengers, opinions were divided. German officers argued that surrender was the only rational option. The war was over. Continuing would be desertion, perhaps even treason. But the two Japanese officers, Tominaga and Kessler, insisted the mission must continue. Japan was still fighting. The material on board could make a difference. For 3 days, Feller pondered. The U-234 sailed in circles 400 kilometers off the Canadian coast, consuming precious fuel while the commander decided the submarine's fate. On May 10th, Feller held a vote among the officers. 7 voted for surrender. 3 voted to continue to Japan. Feller decided to surrender. When the decision was announced, the 2 Japanese officers, Tominaga and General Kessler, retreated to their bunks. That night, both committed suicide by taking luminol, a sedative that is lethal in high doses. Their bodies were buried at sea the following morning with full military honors. On May 12th, Feller received the telegram from Flensburg ordering the destruction of the U-234. This was the 5th attempt to prevent the submarine and its cargo from falling into Allied hands. But Feller had already decided to surrender. He ignored the order to sink the ship. Instead, he surfaced completely, hoisted an improvised black flag, and broadcast on an open channel his intention to surrender to American naval forces. The United States Navy dispatched the destroyer USS Sutton to intercept the U-234. The encounter took place on May 14th, 480 kilometers east of Cape Race, Newfoundland. An American boarding party climbed onto the submarine. What they found left them perplexed. Not just conventional weaponry and technical documents, but lead cylinders containing 560 kilograms of uranium oxide. Military-grade fissile material. The boarding team's commanding officer immediately transmitted the news to Naval Command in Washington. The response came in less than 2 hours. Escort the U-234 to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in New Hampshire under maximum security. No information was to be released about the cargo. The U-234 arrived at Portsmouth on May 19, 1945. The cargo was unloaded in absolute secrecy. The uranium oxide cylinders were transported to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where they became part of the Manhattan Project. The 6th attempt to stop the U-234 came from the Germans themselves, but this time in a bureaucratic form. In June 1945, Admiral Donitz, now an Allied prisoner, demanded that all material from the U-234 be returned to Germany under the terms of the surrender. He argued that the cargo was German property and that its appropriation by the Americans violated the Geneva Conventions. The request was formally denied. The 7th and final attempt came in July 1945, when Soviet agents tried to infiltrate Portsmouth Naval Shipyard to obtain information about the U-234's cargo. The NKVD, the precursor to the KGB, had received reports that the Americans had captured a German submarine with nuclear material. 2 agents were identified and detained by the FBI before they could gain access to the facilities. The incident was classified and remained secret for 40 years. The uranium oxide from the U-234 was processed at Oak Ridge and later incorporated into the American nuclear weapons program. There is historical speculation, never officially confirmed, that part of this material may have been used in Little Boy, the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. Official records indicate that the Hiroshima uranium came from American enrichment facilities, but the timing of the U-234's capture and the launch of the bomb just 11 weeks later has raised questions that have never been fully answered. Johann Heinrich Feller and his crew were held in prisoner-of-war camps in the United States until 1946. During interrogations, Feller provided detailed information about the mission, the cargo, and the orders he had received. He explained that he was fully aware of what he was transporting and the strategic value of the material. When asked why he decided to surrender instead of sinking the submarine as ordered, Feller simply replied, "The war was over. Destroying that material would not save Germany. It would only waste human knowledge." Feller was repatriated to Germany in March 1946. He never spoke publicly about the U-234 or its cargo. He lived the rest of his life quietly in Hamburg, working as a civil engineer. He died in 1982 at the age of 72. His personal papers were donated to the Bundesarchiv, the German Federal Archive, where they remain partially classified to this day. The U-234 was extensively examined by the American Navy before being sunk as a practice target in 1947. But before it was destroyed, every inch of the submarine was documented, measured, and photographed. American naval engineers studied the Type XB design, its innovations in long-term storage, its navigation systems, and its ability to remain submerged for prolonged periods. Many of these innovations influenced the development of the first American nuclear submarines in the 1950s. The story of the U-234 remained classified until 1985, when declassified documents revealed details about the mission and its cargo. Even so, significant aspects of the operation remain secret. The American government has never officially confirmed whether the U-234's uranium was used in nuclear weapons. The German government has never fully explained why it ordered the submarine's destruction even after the official surrender. The U-234 was the last German submarine to surrender in World War II. It was also the only U-boat captured while transporting nuclear material. Of the 7 attempts to stop its mission, 6 failed. The 7th, the Soviet infiltration, was detected and neutralized. In the end, the submarine completed its journey, not to Japan as planned, but into American hands. And the knowledge it carried, knowledge that men died trying to protect and others died trying to capture, helped shape the nuclear world we live in today. The crew knew too much. And because of that, they became the most dangerous target in the Atlantic, even after the war had officially ended.